If someone had told me one kiss could rewrite the seating chart of our lives, I would have asked for a pen. My name is Elena Cruz, and the letter came in a plain white envelope. No return address. Slipped under the door of the tiny apartment I had called home for almost 7 years. My hands shook before I even opened it. I knew what it was. I had been waiting for it, dreading it. When I finally tore the seal and read the words, my stomach dropped like a stone. Notice of deportation proceedings. I had 30 days to leave the country. 30 days before everything I had built here, my job, my life, my fragile hope that I could stay invisible long enough to make something real, crumbled into nothing. I pressed the paper to my chest and tried not to cry. Crying was useless. What I needed was a solution, and the only one was marriage, a legal union, a green card. A piece of paper that could stop my world from collapsing. Except I didn't have anyone. No boyfriend, no girlfriend, no family, just me and the endless, gnawing fear of being found out. That night, I walked into a crowded bar near downtown, the kind of place where the lights were too low, and the music was just loud enough to make it hard to think. I wasn't here to drink. I was here to find someone desperate enough, reckless enough, or maybe just kind enough to save me. It was insane. It was stupid. But what else could I do? My eyes scanned the room, searching for someone alone. Someone who looked like they didn't belong here either. And then I saw her sitting at the far end of the bar, nursing a glass of something clear, flipping through a book instead of a phone. She looked bored, detached, almost annoyed by the noise around her. Black hair tied back in a careless bun, leather jacket draped over her shoulders, lips curved in a line that made her look like she'd won an argument no one else had realized was happening. She didn't belong here, and maybe that was why I walked straight to her. My heart was racing so hard I thought I might pass out. "Hi," I said, voice trembling. She looked up, eyebrows arching. "Do I know you?" "No, but I need to ask you something, and I know it's insane. But hey, if you're enjoying this story, go ahead and drop a like to help us grow even more. And let me know in the comments. On a scale from 0 to 10, what score would you give this story so far? Your feedback makes all the difference. I don't have time to be careful. She closed the book slowly. That's one way to get someone's attention. I swallowed hard, fingers gripping the edge of the bar. "Will you marry me?" Her glass froze halfway to her lips. She blinked, tilted her head, and laughed. Not a cruel laugh, just startled. "Excuse me, I need someone to marry me for papers for survival." My throat tightened. "I'll pay you. I don't have the money now, but I'll work until I can. I'll give you every cent I earn. Please." She stared at me like I had lost my mind. Maybe I had. The silence stretched until I thought my knees would give out. Finally, she set her drink down and said, "You can't just walk up to a stranger and propose marriage." "I know." My voice cracked, but I don't have a choice. Something in my face must have convinced her I wasn't joking because her expression shifted. The sarcasm drained away, replaced by something sharper. "You're serious? Dead serious? You don't even know my name. Then tell me." A beat of silence, her lips curved into the ghost of a smile. "Ava, Elena," I whispered back. "So, will you do it?" She leaned back, studying me like I was a puzzle. She still hadn't chosen whether she wanted to help. "Why me?" "Because you don't look like the type who'd agree." Her laugh came quieter this time. "That's the worst pitch I've ever heard." "Please," I said again, my voice cracking, every shred of pride scraped away. "I'll owe you for the rest of my life if I have to. I can't go back. Not now." She breathed out slowly, tapping her finger along the rim of her glass. The seconds dragged like hours. "At last," she said, "I should refuse. I don't even know you. This is crazy." My chest collapsed. "Okay, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have." But she cut in, her voice low, almost dangerous. "For some reason, I don't want to watch you walk out like the world just ended." My eyes jerked up. You mean I'll consider it, she said. Meet me here tomorrow. Same time. If you're still desperate enough to want this, maybe I'll be reckless enough to agree. My breath caught. I nodded, too shocked to speak. As I stumbled into the night, the deportation notice still folded in my pocket like a curse. I understood two things. I had just asked a stranger to marry me. And maybe, just maybe, she hadn't said no. The next day, I got there early, nerves chewing through me like they had little teeth. I rubbed the same invisible ring of condensation off the bar 3 times, before the bartender finally slid me a water with a look that said, "Calm down." And I tried. I really did. But calm was the one thing I couldn't afford. 30 days had turned into 29 overnight, and time felt like a hallway that kept narrowing. A door closing in slow motion while I scrambled for anyone that could wedge it open. When she stepped in, the room seemed to notice, heads tilted. A hush snapped like static, and then the noise returned as if embarrassed. It had paid attention. Ava wore the same leather jacket, but her hair was down now, a dark sheet catching the dim light. And she had that measured way of walking like the floor had been designed to carry only her weight. She found me without looking. You came, she said, as if the fact surprised and didn't surprise her at once. You asked me to, I answered, very softly, and my voice betrayed me by shaking on the last word. She set her book on the polished wood like a boundary she could lift at any moment and watched me with eyes so steady I felt like a classroom caught cheating. I did, she said, and I've been thinking. It scared me how much I wanted her thoughts to save me. It scared me that someone else's choice could decide whether my life here kept its shape. I don't do impulsive, she continued, rolling the edge of her glass between her fingers. I make lists. I research. I ask what happens next and next after that. But I didn't sleep last night. And every time I closed my eyes, I saw your face when you said please. And I heard something in my head say, do not look away. I held my breath until it hurt. So, you'll do it? I asked, and the question felt like stepping off a ledge. Maybe, she said, and the maybe landed like a rope thrown across a river. Not enough to cross, but enough to grab. But if I say yes, there have to be rules and honesty and an understanding that this isn't a movie montage. This is risk that could take us both down if we're reckless. Shame flared hot under my skin. I nodded too fast. I know. I'm not trying to drag you into something criminal. I just Elena, she interrupted gently. My name a cool palm on a fever. The line between survival and fraud is thin enough to slice you open. If this happens, we have to walk that line with our eyes open, not pretend it isn't there. We talk to someone qualified. We do nothing we're not willing to say in front of a judge. I don't go to jail for a stranger, even a compelling one. A laugh broke out of me before I could stop it. Brittle and grateful. Understandable, I said. I don't want jail for either of us. I want breath, space to breathe without checking the street every 10 seconds. She tilted her head, studying me with that unhurried attention I was already starting to crave. Tell me the truth, she said. All of it you can stand to say. So I did. I told her about arriving with a suitcase that squeaked and a promise I made to a mother who packed oranges in my bag and said, find the life that doesn't grind you down. I told her about the first winter when my fingers cracked washing dishes for 12 hours a day. About the English that sounded like pebbles in my mouth until it didn't. About the landlord who stopped answering texts the second the rent was late by 20 minutes. I told her about fear, the kind that sits on your chest at 3 a.m. and counts the things you can lose like it's reciting a lullaby. I told her about the letter, and the way the words looked like a hole punched in a map. She didn't flinch. She didn't say poor thing or you should have done this or why didn't you do that. She listened the way people say prayers with all the noisy parts of themselves turned off. And when I ran out of facts and had only feelings left, she let those live in the air between us without embarrassment. What about you? I asked when I remembered reciprocity was a kind of mercy. She blinked once like the question had knocked Me. You make lists, I said. You research. You read a book in the loudest bar I've ever been in. That's not nothing. A slow smile, reluctant and genuine, touched her mouth. I work for people who think they can bend cities by talking louder, she said. I make sure they follow rules even when they want to crush them. My father died when I was 20, and my mother taught me not to owe anyone money or explanations. Then she took a job on the other side of an ocean, because she doesn't like staying long enough in one place to be disappointed by it. I have a habit of keeping my coat on at parties because I never believe I'm not about to leave. I'm good in emergencies. I'm bad at letting people know I'm afraid. It struck me, the slant of it, how someone so composed could be wired for departure. You didn't leave last night, I said. No, she said, meeting my eyes. I didn't. We sat with that like it was a candle between us, flickering and ridiculous in a room full of neon. If we do this, she said, finally a pivot into a different air, I want you to understand something. I won't pretend in my home and I won't lie with my signature. If I stand up with you, I stand up as myself, and I won't be able to do that unless we decide to try for a real life, not a staged one. Try, she repeated as if the word were fragile and worth polishing. It might fail. We might hate each other by Friday, but I won't file an application for a love I don't agree to attempt. The world tilted, soft and seismic. I had walked in ready to barter my soul for a stamp. Here she was offering something that sounded like dignity. I don't know how to be anyone but myself, I said, throat tight. I can do trying. I can't guarantee I'll be easy. She huffed laughter. I don't like easy, she said. It reads like a lie. You really think we could? I couldn't say the word. Love felt like a suit I wasn't allowed to wear. She spared me. I think I could look at you in the morning, she said, and those 8 words threaded a needle and pulled me through. I also think we need to talk to a lawyer before either of us says yes. I nodded, dizzy with relief that had logic in it. I know someone, she added when my face confessed. I did not. Not my client's guy, a real one. Private, discreet. She'll tell us what's right and what burns you. If you still want to proceed after that, we set terms, boundaries, timelines. And you do not owe me your future earnings like a debtor in a bad novel. But I promise money, I blurred it, embarrassed by how small my voice sounded when I tried to be noble. You shouldn't do this for free. I'm not, she said. I'll take payment in the only thing worth anything here. Clarity. If we choose this, it's because we both do. Eyes open. And because we're both allowed to say no if the ground shifts under us. I'm not your savior. I'm a person who for some reason would rather step into the storm with you than watch you drown. It landed inside me like bread after hunger. Okay, I whispered. Okay. Finish your water, she said, nodding at my barely touched glass. Then come for a walk. I think better round corners. We left the bar, and the day was young enough to be kind. The sun made coins on the asphalt, and the wind smelled like the bakery 2 blocks over. That put too much sugar on everything, a sin I resented and craved. We walked without touching, a parallel that felt newly intentional, and she asked questions that didn't feel like tests. Where do you go when you're sad? What music did your mother play when she cleaned? What food would you cook for someone who'd never met your country? What makes you feel like you exist? I answered clumsily at first, then with more muscle as I realized she wasn't collecting information to use as leverage. She was building a map, and she tended to maps with the kind of care you use when you actually plan to go. She told me small things that turned into large ones as they stacked. The scar on her knee from slipping on a pool deck, the way she counts windows when she's anxious, the list of city trees she keeps on her phone. The fact that she hates thunderstorms, not because of the sound, but because of the seconds of silence before the sound. How those are the seconds where she thinks about everything that can't be stopped. We crossed streets like they didn't belong to us yet, and stopped on a pedestrian bridge where the river carried yesterday away. She leaned on the railing and stared at the water like it owed her a straight answer. "Do you believe in fate?" she asked, and her voice had a softness I hadn't heard yet, a note only rivers get. "I believe in hunger," I said, "and stubbornness and luck that feels like a dare." "I don't believe in fate," she said as if correcting herself in real time. "I believe in choices made at the speed of a heartbeat that rearranged the furniture of your whole life." She looked at me then, and there it was again, the door creaking open in my chest. "Here are mine," she said, and pulled a small notebook from her jacket like a magician revealing a dove. 1. We meet the lawyer tomorrow morning. 2. If she says run, we run. 3. If she says there's a way, we still only proceed if we both agree to try for something that can stand in daylight. 4. No lying to the people who matter. We don't make allies into props. 5. If you ever feel like you're drowning and I'm the water, you say stop and I step back. My laugh was unsteady. "You brought a list to a proposal." "Always," she said, deadpan, and then her mouth did the thing it did when she allowed herself the smallest joke. And I wanted to put my hands on that smile and memorize it like a recipe. I fished a pen for my backpack, one of those cheap hotel pens that always betray you, and wrote my own line beneath hers. 6. I said, "If you ever feel like you're a scaffolding I built to hold up a lie, we tear it down." She nodded as if I'd passed a test she was relieved I knew existed. We stayed on the bridge until the wind made our fingers numb, and when we turned back toward the bar, the distance between our arms had shortened by some invisible measurement. I could feel in the heat radiating from her coat. Outside the door, she stopped, the glass reflecting us as if we were already a pair. "I didn't say yes," she reminded even as the corner of her mouth betrayed her. "I know, but I didn't say no. I know that, too." "You're still sure?" "No," I said, honest and light-hearted. "But I'm certain." She barked a surprised laugh. "That doesn't make sense." "It does to me." She shook her head, then sobered. "Elena, if I do this, it won't be because you owe me. It will be because I decided I want my life to include your stubbornness. And your oranges in a suitcase, mother. And the way you look at the future like it's a dough you can convince to rise by force of will. If I say yes, you don't pay me back with money. You pay me back by telling me the truth even when it's ugly." "I can do ugly truth," I said. "I've been living in it." Something in her eyes flickered as if a match had taken. "Tomorrow," she said, 9 a.m. coffee first. Then the lawyer. "Okay. And Elena?" "Yes. If after all of that, we still decide to sign a paper together. I want our first kiss to be one we choose, not one we barter." Heat rushed to my face so fast. I wanted to step into the river. I was grateful suddenly for winter air. "We didn't last night." "I didn't. You didn't," she agreed, and her voice made it sound like bravery. "But when we do, I'd like to know that it's not about saving anyone but ourselves from living smaller than we could." I nodded because words were a foreign country again. She reached past me to open the door, but before she let it swing wide, she added almost as an afterthought that was anything but, "For what it's worth, I think I already started choosing." Then she was inside and I was outside, and the world looked a little different around the edges, like someone had adjusted the focus. I pressed my palm to the cool glass, counting my own heartbeat like a metronome. Tomorrow might bring a closed door. Tomorrow might bring a map. For tonight I held on to the wild, improbable fact that a stranger had met my desperation with rules and mercy, and that somewhere between those two things, I could see the outline of a life I hadn't dared to sketch. I walked home with the letter a little less heavy in my pocket. I rehearsed no and yes the whole way, not because I wanted to be ready to change her mind, but because I wanted to be ready to accept whichever would be kinder to the person I was. When I asked, it didn't feel like I was marching toward a crime. It felt like I was walking toward a door that might unlock if both of us decided to turn the key at exactly the same time. And that was the difference between survival that hollows you out and survival that makes room for a heart. I slept on the couch under the window, shoes still on, because I didn't trust the night not to move. and dreamed the simplest dream. A kitchen light, a mug, a name said by someone who had decided to stay. In the morning, I woke to my phone buzzing. A message from an unsaved number. 900 a.m. It read, "Don't be late." And below it, as if she couldn't help herself, 3 words that set the clock inside my chest to something like, "Hope, we'll do this right." I typed back on a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding for years. "I'll be there." And for the first time since the white envelope slid under my door, I believed myself. The office smelled like paper and peppermint tea, not the sharp leather and intimidation I'd expected. Ava held the door open for me, her jacket brushing my arm as I stepped inside, and even that tiny touch set every nerve humming. The woman behind the desk looked calm, efficient, and not at all surprised when Ava introduced us. "Elena, this is Priya Shah. She doesn't waste time." Priya adjusted her glasses and gave me a look that seemed to pierce through excuses. "So, you're here because you want to get married for immigration purposes." My throat went dry. "Yes. I mean, if that's possible." "Possible," Priya repeated, leaning back in her chair. "Yes, simple. No. This isn't some fairy tale paperwork. Immigration officials are trained to catch fraud. They'll ask questions you won't see coming. They'll interview you separately. They'll want photos, proof of a shared life, bills, leases, details down to which side of the bed you sleep on." My stomach clenched. "I can learn," I said. "I can memorize anything." Ava's hand flexed against her notebook, but she stayed silent. Priya tilted her head. "It's not about memorizing. It's about living convincingly enough that you stop noticing the difference. That means moving in together, combining finances, knowing each other's families, tastes, habits. That means committing for at least 2 years before conditions lift. Are you ready for that?" The number hit me like a slap. 2 years. Not just 10 days. Not just survival. My voice broke. "If I don't, I'll be deported." Priya nodded once. No softness in her eyes. "Then the question isn't whether you're desperate enough. It's whether she," her gaze slid to Ava, "is willing to burn her life into yours that deeply." Ava finally spoke, her voice low but steady. "What happens if they find out it's fake?" "Fines, prison, deportation for her. A record for you. It's not worth doing unless you're all in." Silence sat heavy. I couldn't breathe. I wanted to reach for Ava, beg her, promise her anything, but her face was unreadable, carved into composure. Priya closed the folder in front of her. "Think carefully. Come back in a week if you're certain. Don't come back if you're not." We walked out into cold daylight, the city rushing around us like it had no idea my world was collapsing. I hugged myself, fighting the sting of tears. "You're going to say no, aren't you?" I whispered. Ava didn't answer right away. She stood there, hands in her pockets, looking up at the sky like she was searching for an instruction manual. Finally, she turned to me. "Do you understand what this means, Elena? 2 years living together, pretending or not pretending until it's indistinguishable. That's not a transaction. That's a life." I know my voice cracked and I don't have another option. For the first time since I'd met her, something in her expression softened. Not pity, something closer to recognition. She stepped closer, close enough that I felt the warmth of her coat. "You said you'd pay me back with money," she said quietly. "Forget that. If I do this, it's because I want to stand in it with you. And if I stand in it, we're not faking. We're choosing. Understand?" I swallowed hard, nodding. "Yes, good." She took a breath like the decision weighed more than her bones could hold. "Then I'll give you my answer tomorrow." And before I could speak, she walked away, leaving me in the cold with hope burning so hot it almost hurt. I didn't sleep so much as bargain with the dark. If I keep my eyes open, nothing will change. If I close them, I'll wake to a life with edges that cut less. If I count the cracks in the ceiling, I'll invent a number big enough to swallow fear. When morning finally pried the room open, my phone buzzed on the nightstand like a tiny emergency. And there it was. Ava, coffee at 8. Bring your lease and whatever proves you're you. My hands shook so hard I sent 3 replies in my head before I managed one out loud on the screen. On my way. The streets were still rinsed with dawn when I reached the corner cafe. She was already there, hair pulled back, jacket neatly folded on the chair beside her, a folder stacked with color-coded tabs that made my stomach loosen and tense at the same time. She looked up and I watched the professional set of her mouth softened by a centimeter. When she saw my face, a change so small anyone else would miss it, and so enormous it felt like being let out of a locked room. Sit, she said, and slid a coffee toward me exactly the way I take it, which would have been romantic if it weren't proof she'd interrogated my habits the night before, and written them down in that quiet brain of hers where facts turn into solutions. I handed her my lease, my payabs, the photocopy of my passport, the letter I hated, and she placed each item with a care that made me want to cry. I spoke to Priya again, she said, tapping the top of the folder. There's a path. It's narrow and steep and full of places to fall. But it exists. If we commit to a real life for 2 years. If we marry at the courthouse. If we move in immediately. If we combine what can be combined without wrecking either of us. If we learn each other like it matters, because it does. Then we can file and breathe between the interviews. I didn't realize I was gripping the paper cup until it buckled. Does that mean yes? She said, and the word was so simple I almost missed it. When it landed, my chest emptied and flooded at once. I'm saying yes, Elena. Not to theater. To trying. To choosing you in a way that can stand in daylight. For a heartbeat, everything in the cafe went soft around the edges. The hissing milk, the bell at the door, the weathered wood, all of it blurring behind the fact that someone had just climbed into the storm with me and called it living. I had practiced gratitude speeches in my head all night, noble and eloquent and humble, and what broke out of my throat instead was an unlowly sound that made her smile with an ache in it. We're going to do this right, she said, and turned the folder toward me so I could see the plan. Bullet points like stepping stones. 1. Courthouse appointment request submitted. 2. Meet Priya this afternoon to sign attorney of record and map evidence list. 3. Add Elena to my lease and utilities. 4. Open a joint account for shared expenses with documented deposits. 5. Move your essentials today. 6. Practice interview questions nightly. 7. Tell to people each we trust. So our world isn't built entirely of secrecy. 8. Document ordinary things. Receipts, dinners, the stupid socks you buy each other. Because ordinary is what convinces people we're real. I traced each line with my eyes like a prayer. I was learning by heart. I can still back out if this feels wrong to you, she added, voice lower. And for the first time, I saw the vein of terror that ran under her steel. 2 years is a decision you're allowed to remake until the moment we sign. I don't want to run, I said, surprised by how true it sounded in the air. I'm tired of running. She nodded once, decision setting her posture like a spine. Then we start today. We left the cafe, and the morning brightened as if it had been waiting for us to choose. At my studio, I flung the door open on a life too small for the amount of feeling inside it. Half a bed, a table with one good leg and one improvisation, a shelf of cookbooks my mother would have approved of on principle and scolded me for on price. One plant that refused to die just to spite me. Ava stood in the doorway absorbing it all without commentary, and then slipped her jacket off and rolled her sleeves like she was about to help me lift something heavy I'd been carrying alone. Essentials first, she said, finding the cadence of emergencies again. Documents, more clothes, anything sentimental you'd punish yourself forever for forgetting. We moved like people who had known each other longer than a bar and a bridge. I packed, she labeled. I hesitated over a chipped mug that used to be my mother's, and she held out both hands, as if taking an infant, and carried it to the box like it was a vowel we couldn't lose. My neighbor, Mrs. Delgado, from across the hall, peered out with rollers in her hair and suspicion in her eyes, and then recognized the shape of panic on my face, and smuggled us packing tape with the solemnity of a sacrament. When she asked who this woman was, my mouth didn't know how to answer, and my brain remembered Priya's rule about not lying to the people who matter. "This is Ava," I said, and I watched the word choose its own weight. "She's helping me." Mrs. Delgado's gaze slid over Ava's steady hands and clean lines, and landed on the way she stood inside my threshold without swallowing the room. Her eyes softened by a fraction. "You let me know if you need a ride," she said. "And to Ava, you drive careful with my girl's life in that trunk." "I will," Ava said, and something like respect passed between the two of them that made my throat burn. At her building, the elevator smelled faintly of vanilla and new paint. Her apartment looked like a person who always expected guests, spare but warm. Books stacked in ways that suggested both taste and trio. Plants thriving. Art that meant something to someone? She cleared a drawer, and then handed me hangers that matched, and didn't make a ceremony of the generosity. I put my toothbrush in her cup and watched it sit there like a trespass. That decided to be a belonging. We made a small, ridiculous space for my mother's mug beside her sleek white ones, and it looked wrong and perfect. She opened her closet and told me which side was colder, and how she slept with the window cracked even in winter, and that she would adapt if my lungs threatened mutiny. We did the utilities, the lease addendum, the bank appointment, each task rung on a ladder out of a hole. "We should talk about boundaries," she said while we waited on hold with a customer service that kept asking if we were satisfied with our experience. She was looking at the fridge like it could hold our lives if we wrote them down. Food mornings. Guests. The degree to which I am allowed to alphabetize your spices without you throwing me out. "You alphabetize spices vigorously," she said, and the deadpan was a beam I could walk across. "Okay," I said. "Boundaries. I wake up early and sing without meaning to. You're allowed to ban me from doing that before 8. I take hot showers until the water loses its will to live. I will set a timer. I cry at commercials, but only the ones with dogs. I don't like thunder either because of the part before the sound." She looked at me fast. That same caught look from the bridge when the river took something for safekeeping. "Me too," she said. "The silence is the worst." We put a magnet on the freezer and called it the list place, and in shaky handwriting, we wrote groceries, rent, Priya, socks, electricity, breathe. At noon, we sat with Priya again and signed things with our real names. She gave us a checklist that made the first one look like a children's menu, and told us the courthouse backlog was a storm that could part suddenly and drown the unprepared. "Keep your bags packed," she said. "They call, you go." We spent the afternoon doing ordinary miracles, buying too cheap mugs that said bride by mistake because the clearance bin didn't care about our timeline, letting the clerk hand us a receipt with a heart doodled on it, standing at the pharmacy arguing gently about toothpaste like people do when they plan to wake up next to each other and share mint. At home, we cooked badly together on purpose because I wanted to hear her laugh when the garlic jumped from the pan, and when it came like a window unlatched, clean and surprised. After dinner, we sat at the table with Priya Shah's sample interview list and quizzed each other with questions. That felt like dares and vows. Where did we meet? A bar where she refused to be background noise. What's my favorite meal? Anything citrus because my mother said oranges taste like mornings. What side of the bed do I sleep on? I didn't. Not really. I slept like someone on the run. She said left and I said right. And then we both stared at the bedroom as if it might answer us. What's her worst habit? Counting exits. What's mine? Counting losses before they arrive. What's the name of the plant I'll absolutely kill by accident? The spider plant with too much pride. What scent does she wear? None. Just soap and a little mint and something like paper. By the time the dark climbed the windows, I knew the outline of her day. And she knew the scar on my knee from falling from a fig tree when I was 9. And the way I pinch the bridge of my nose when I'm lying. No lying, she said, tapping the paper, and I heard what she meant even when she didn't say the rest. No lying, I echoed and felt something inside me take a breath I hadn't thought it earned. The bedroom chose itself because we let it. The bed was larger than mine had been, and the sheets smelled like lavender and assurance. She stood on one side and I stood on the other, and the room thrummed like a string pulled tight. "We don't have to," she began, and I knew she meant share, touch, crash into a future just because the law wanted us to perform it. "I know," I said, because she had given me the same mercy already. "But for the record, I sleep better when I can hear someone breathing." She looked at me for a long beat like I had just loosened a knot she'd held in her ribs for years. And then she flicked off the lamp and the room exhaled. We lay there not touching, two lines in a field that had not decided to cross, listening to the city do its unfixable business. And the quiet between us wasn't empty. It was full of all the things we weren't rushing. My phone lit the ceiling with a blue ghost of news. I rolled to check it, heart miscounting for reasons that, for once, had nothing to do with danger. And there it was. Priya Shah, courthouse just called. Friday 9:20 a.m. cancellation slot opened. "Can you make it with IDs and one witness?" My breath left so fast I had to sit up. "What is it?" Ava asked, voice low, already halfway to purpose. I turned the screen so she could see and watched her pupils widen to let the future in. 2 days, she said, and every part of her steeled. "We can make 2 days. A witness," I whispered, because for all the lists and papers and neat stacks, what if our lives hold no one who could stand beside us and say this is real? She was already moving, reaching for the pen on the nightstand, writing names in the dark on the back of Priya Shah's checklist like a person who knows that sometimes the right witnesses are the ones who saw you before you could see yourself. "We'll ask Priya," she murmured, "and the bartender, and Mrs. Delgado." And she stopped when I touched her wrist without thinking, the moment landing between us like a decision we hadn't remembered we were making. "We're really doing this," I said. And this time, the tremor in my voice wasn't fear. It was awe. "We are," she said. And in the shadowed room, I heard the smile that hadn't quite learned to be easy. And the clock on my phone ticked toward a morning when two signatures would rearrange the furniture of our lives. And all I could think, very plain and simple and enormous, was that I knew which coffee she'd want when she woke. The day before the courthouse felt like a stopwatch pressed to our throats. We woke before the alarm, drank coffee standing up, and turned Priya's checklist into small victories. Print the lease addendum with both names. Open the shared expenses account and drop in $10 each like planting a flag. Snap time-stamped photos that didn't look staged. Me making eggs while Ava steals the spatula. Her alphabetizing my spices while I try not to laugh. The two of us arguing over whether the plant near the window is dramatic or merely thirsty. Evidence that ordinary had begun. We needed a witness. I knocked on Mrs. Delgado's door with my heart in my hands, and she answered in rollers and lipstick, listened, crossed herself, then said in Spanish, "You will not face a judge alone," and I nearly cried into her floral robe. "I'll be there, MCA," she said, "and I will bring tissues for everyone." Ava's mouth did that infinitesimal curve that meant relief. Later, at lunch, she dragged me into a strip mall jeweler and bought two thin silver bands that felt like promises. We were too careful to name. "Receipts," she whispered, but her fingers shook when I slid hers on to check the size. And my own throat closed when she slid mine on, and the cool metal warmed almost instantly as if it had been waiting for skin. We practiced interview questions. Walking home, favorite foods, worst habit. Where do you keep the extra towels? Then slowed at the last one on the page, the one Priya Shah had starred. Why did you marry? Ava stopped under a street light and looked at me like the question had teeth. Because fear is loud, she said finally, but staying is louder. And the way she said staying made something click in my chest like a lock recognizing its key. At home, We taped the receipt to Priya Shah's folder, fed the plant, argued gently about whether the witness should sit to my left or right. And then the sky rolled its first warning. The storm came without rain, just that muffled air before thunder that steals the oxygen from your lungs. I saw Ava's shoulders tighten, the exact flinch I knew too well, and the room shrank to the space between us. I could talk through it, I offered. Or we could count songs or make tea or stay. She said so quietly I barely heard it. So I did. I sat beside her on the edge of the bed and told her the silliest stories I had. My mother's superstition about peeling oranges toward the sun. The way I named all my suitcases after saints who traveled badly until the silence cracked. And the thunder finally arrived and we both laughed at having survived the worst part. When it faded, the apartment felt changed like a room after a blessing. Ava touched the magnet list on the freezer, the one that said breathe. And then she turned to me with an expression I didn't know how to protect myself from. We said our first kiss would be one we chose, she murmured. Not one we barter. I nodded, heart sparking. Then let's choose. The kiss was soft and terrifying in the only good way. Nothing to prove. No audience. Just the clear fact of her mouth on mine. And the years of unslept nights sliding off my shoulders. She exhaled against me like relief. I whispered, "Thank you," against her lip without meaning to. And we broke apart with the kind of smile people wear after deciding to live. My phone buzzed. Priya Shah, courthouse cancellation just opened for today at 10 p.m. Judge available. Can you make it with IDs and witness? My breath misfired. Today, I said, showing her the screen. Ava didn't even blink. She reached for her jacket, grabbed the folder, tucked loose hair behind her ear with surgeon calm, and said, "Call Mrs. Delgado. I'll order the car. We're ready." And for the first time, I believed her. We didn't even have time to panic. 1 second, we were in pajamas with a messy kitchen. The next, we were racing through the city in the back seat of a ride share. Ava with a folder open on her lap, me clutching the rings like they might disappear. Mrs. Delgado slid into the car last, lipstick brighter than the sunset, and declared, "I will cry, but I will cry quietly." Ava almost smiled, the sharp edges of her focus softening for half a breath. At the courthouse, the clerk barely glanced at us before handing over forms thicker than a Bible. "Fill these out. Judge will see you in 10. My hand shook so badly, I smudged the ink. Ava studied the paper with her palm, not touching me exactly, but anchoring me all the same. When it was time, we followed the clerk into a wood-paneled room where the judge looked as tired as a man who'd seen every version of love and fraud. He raised an eyebrow. "Names?" Ava spoke first, crisp and certain. "Ava Whitaker." "Elena Cruz," I whispered, and the sound of my name next to hers made the whole thing tilt toward real. The judge skimmed the documents. "Witness." Mrs. Delgado raised her hand like she was volunteering for battle. "Present. I have known Elena since she carried her groceries up 3 flights alone and refused help. This woman," she pointed at Ava, "cooks eggs like someone who has already decided to stay." "I approve." The judge coughed to hide a laugh. "Fine. Rings." Ava passed his gaze like it was another test. "Yes." She took my hand, slid the silver band onto my finger, voice steady, "For proof, for protection, for trying." My throat closed, but I managed to do the same for her, whispering, "For breath, for staying, for us." The judge signed the certificate with a bored flourish. "Congratulations, you're married." It should have felt fake. It should have felt like a trick. Instead, standing there with her hand still wrapped around mine, it felt terrifyingly like the beginning of something that might undo us both in the best way. When we stepped outside, Mrs. Delgado dabbed her eyes and announced she was making a canoe to celebrate. Ava turned to me on the courthouse steps, the city buzzing around us, and for once she looked unguarded. "Well, wife," she said, almost playful, ready to convince the world. I laughed, dizzy. "The world doesn't scare me half as much as you do." And then, because we had to walk forward or fall apart. We went home together, married, legal, and balanced on the edge of a future neither of us had planned. The apartment looked the same, but it didn't feel the same. The toothbrushes leaned together in the cup like they knew a secret. The plant looked smug. Even the magnet list on the freezer seemed to shimmer with new weight. Married. The word followed me around like a song stuck in my head. Ava dropped the folder on the table, kicked off her shoes, and leaned against the counter with a posture of someone pretending not to be shaken. "Well," she said, "we did it." "Yeah," I whispered. "We're married." The silence that followed was thick. Not awkward exactly, but full of things we weren't sure we were allowed to say. I set the rings box on the shelf next to my mother's mug and realized my hands were trembling. Ava noticed. She crossed the room slow, deliberate, until she stood close enough for her warmth to brush my skin. "Scared?" she asked softly. "Terrified," I admitted. "Me, too," she said, and that was somehow the kindest thing she could have given me. We ate Mrs. Delgado's Eros's con pollo straight from the pot, sitting side by side on the couch, laughing when the rice spilled onto the cushions. For a moment, it was easy, almost normal. Two women sharing food, not two women bound by a paper that could save or ruin us. Later, in the bedroom, the air shifted again. She stood by the window, pulling her hair loose, while I tried not to panic about which side of the bed was mine now. Finally, she looked at me, eyes softer than I'd ever seen them. "Elena, we don't have to rush anything. Not tonight. Not ever. But I want you to know." She hesitated, then continued. "I don't regret saying yes." Something in my chest cracked wide open. I climbed onto the bed, patting the space beside me. "Then stay," I whispered. She did. She slid under the blanket close enough that our shoulders touched. We didn't kiss. We didn't even hold hands. We just lay there breathing in sync, the city humming outside, the rings cooling on our fingers like quiet promises. And for the first time in years, I fell asleep without fear pressing on my chest because she was there and she had chosen to stay. Morning light slipped through the half-open curtains, painting the room in gold. For the first time in years, I woke up before fear. Ava was already awake, propped on one elbow, scrolling her phone with the kind of focus she gave everything. When she noticed my eyes opening, she set it down and said, "Good morning, wife," like she was trying the word on her tongue. It made me laugh and blush at once. "You don't have to call me that." "I know," she said, a ghost of a smile tugging at her lips. "But it's true." We stumbled into a routine without meaning to. She made coffee strong enough to wake the dead. I balanced it with toast and jam. She liked to read the news out loud and dry commentary. I countered with music, filling the kitchen with old Brazilian songs my mother used to hum. At first, it felt staged, like we were playing at domesticity. But slowly, the act softened into something else. Something that felt suspiciously like home. When Priya texted asking for photos of normal life, Ava dragged me into the kitchen. Flour on my cheeks, her arms slung round me as if it belonged there. The shutter clicked. Later, looking at the picture, I realized it didn't look fake. It looked like us. But there were cracks in my calm. Every time the mail came, I felt my chest tighten, expecting another letter that could ruin everything. Ava noticed. She touched my wrist one afternoon and said, "We'll get through this together." The way she said together made my heart stumble. That night, as we folded laundry, her shirt brushed mine, and the air between us shifted. My pulse jumped. She glanced at me, eyes darker, lingering longer than they should. For a second, the whole world shrank to that almost touch, that almost kiss. But she looked away, folding carefully, giving me space. "We're learning," she said softly, "one day at a time." I nodded breathless, but my chest was already betraying me, because I didn't just want safety anymore. I wanted her. The tension had been building all day, sharp and invisible, like static before a storm. It was in the way her hand brushed mine when she passed the salt. In the way I caught her staring when she thought I wasn't looking. In the way silence stretched too long before one of us filled it with nervous laughter. That evening we sat on the couch with Priya's list of married couple-proof tasks, photos, receipts, shared playlists. It feels ridiculous, I muttered, tossing the pen onto the coffee table. Love isn't supposed to be documented like taxes. Ava raised an eyebrow. Who said anything about love? The words hit harder than they should. I looked at her, heart thudding, and she must have seen the flicker of hurt on my face because her expression softened immediately. I didn't mean yes, I whispered. Silence fell again. This time it wasn't awkward. It was dangerous. She leaned closer slowly, like testing gravity. I forgot how to breathe. Her hair brushed my cheek, her lips a breath from mine, and the room spun with the possibility of a kiss we had promised to choose, not barter. Ava, I whispered, my voice shaking. Elena. Her voice was low, steady, but her eyes betrayed the same storm tearing through me. We hovered there, suspended, hearts racing in sync. I could almost taste her. Almost. Then her phone buzzed on the table, shattering the moment. She pulled back fast, the spell broken, her walls snapping back into place. It's Priya, she said, voice to calm. An interview scheduled. 2 weeks. 2 weeks. My future would be decided in 2 weeks. I nodded, trying to hide the ache of what almost happened. But as she turned back to her phone, her hand brushed mine again. And this time, she didn't move it away. 2 weeks sounded like forever, but it passed like a countdown. Every night after work, Ava quizzed me with a list of possible questions. Her voice calm and steady while mine trembled with nerves. What side of the bed does she sleep on? She asked. Right, I said. Her eyes flicked to me, teasing. Wrong. You drift. You always end up in the middle. I laughed, embarrassed, but she smiled like she was memorizing me. Some nights we cooked together for the sake of receipts. Other nights, we fell asleep on the couch. Priya's checklist scattered around us. Slowly, what began as practice started to feel real. I learned she hated olives, but loved lemon on everything. She learned I couldn't fall asleep without music playing softly in the background. One evening, we staged photos for evidence, laughing in the kitchen, sharing wine, tangled on the couch. At one point, she reached across, brushed a crumb from my lip, and froze. Her thumb lingered, her gaze locked with mine, and the air thickened with something unscripted. This doesn't look fake, she whispered. Because it's not, I whispered back. The words slipped out before I could stop them. We didn't kiss. She pulled away, running a hand through her hair like she was furious at herself. But something between us had shifted. That night, as we lay in the dark, her voice broke the silence. Elena, if they ask me why I married you, I'll tell them the truth. My heart stopped. What truth? That I wanted to stay. The days crawled toward the interview, but inside the apartment time ran differently. Every morning, Ava poured my coffee before I asked. Every night, I found my pillow smelled faintly of her shampoo. We weren't pretending anymore. Not really. One evening, we practiced again. What's her favorite childhood memory? Ava asked. My mother singing while peeling oranges, I answered. She smiled softly. That one I knew already. We ended up sitting too close on the couch, the list of questions forgotten between us. Her knee brushed mine, and neither of us moved away. You know this isn't part of the checklist, right? I whispered. Maybe it should be, she murmured. Her hand found mine, fingers curling tight. The kiss felt inevitable like gravity. No bargaining, no staged affection, just the sharp, sweet relief of finally crossing a line we'd been circling for weeks. Her lips were warm, steady, searching, and I kissed back like I've been holding my breath since the day I met her. When we pulled apart, we were both breathing hard. That was reckless, she whispered. Then let's be reckless again, I said and kissed her once more. The rest of the night blurred into laughter, confessions, and a closeness that scared me almost as much as it saved me. We weren't just preparing for an interview anymore. We were falling, and somewhere deep down I knew there was no way back. The morning after the kiss, everything felt sharper. Coffee hotter, the air heavier, her presence impossible to ignore. I kept replaying it in my head. The way she had pulled me closer, the sound she made when she finally let go. But Ava was quiet. Too quiet. Over breakfast, she tapped her pen against Priya's list. We can't let this distract us. The interview is in 5 days. Distract us? I repeated, my heart sinking. She sighed, setting the pen down. Elena, if they see through us, you lose everything. I can't let that happen. So, the kiss was what a mistake. Her eyes flashed, but she didn't answer right away. Finally, she said it was real. That's the problem. Real feelings make people reckless, and we can't afford reckless. The word stung, but I understood. Still, that night when we rehearsed again, favorite movies, pet peeves, middle names, the tension was unbearable. She asked, "What side of the bed do I sleep on?" "Left," I answered automatically. "Wrong," she said softly. "I sleep wherever you aren't until you drift close." My breath caught. She leaned in, then stopped herself, clenching her jaw. "We can't," she whispered, but when I reached for her hand, she didn't pull away. And in the silence between us, the truth was undeniable. No matter how much we tried to control it, we were already into deep. The courthouse waiting room smelled of stale coffee and nerves. Couples sat shoulder to shoulder, some holding hands, others avoiding eye contact. Ava and I were in the middle, our fingers loosely entwined. Her thumb tracing absent circles against my skin like she couldn't stop even if she tried. When the officer called our names, my pulse went wild. Inside the interview room, the walls were bare, the table cold. A woman in a gray suit looked up from our file. "Congratulations on your marriage," she said flatly. "We just need to confirm a few things." She split us up. Ava went first. I sat outside, chewing my lip until it bled, imagining every possible slip, every suspicion. When it was my turn, my legs felt made of glass. The officer's questions came quick. Where does Ava keep her toothbrush? What's her favorite breakfast? What side of the bed does she sleep on? Left, I answered. Then I swallowed and added, though she ends up in the middle if I drift too close. The officer's pen paused mid-scratch. Her eyes flicked up sharp. That's very specific. It's the truth, I said. And for once, it didn't feel like a performance. After what felt like hours, I was dismissed. Back in the waiting room, Ava was already there. Her face was calm, but her eyes gave her away. I sat beside her, our knees brushing. "Well," I whispered. She exhaled slow. "They'll let us know in a few weeks." It wasn't a yes. It wasn't a no. Just a chasm of waiting. But when she took my hand again, firm and certain, I realized something. Even if the government didn't believe in us, we already did. Days stretched into weeks. Every envelope in the mailbox made my stomach drop. Every unknown number on my phone made my hands sweat. But the letter we were waiting for didn't come. In the meantime, life happened. We bought groceries together. We argued about laundry. We laughed at sitcom reruns on the couch. Somewhere along the way, the act of being married stopped feeling like rehearsal and started feeling like routine. But waiting gnawed at me. One night, I found Ava on the balcony wrapped in her jacket, staring out at the city lights. Her shoulders were tense, her jaw clenched. "You're scared too?" I said quietly. She didn't look at me. "Of course, I'm scared. I built walls around my life, Elena, and then you came with your stubborn eyes and tore them down in 10 days. Now everything feels fragile." I stepped closer. Fragile doesn't mean fake. Finally, she turned, eyes shimmering with something she usually kept buried. "Do you understand what it means? If this gets denied, you'll lose your home and I'll lose you." My breath caught. You'd miss me. Her laugh cracked. Miss you? God. Elena, I'm already in love with you. The words landed like a strike of lightning. I froze, then grabbed her hand. Say it again. I love you, she whispered. Study now. Not because of the papers. Not because of survival. Because you're you, and I don't know how to unload you anymore. I pressed my forehead to hers, tears burning. Then whatever happens with that letter, we'll face it together. For the first time, she didn't argue. She just pulled me into her arms and held on like she'd never let go. It arrived on a Tuesday morning, a plain white envelope. No different from the one that had started all this. My hands shook as I pulled it from the mailbox. Ava was beside me, steady as stone, though I could feel the tension radiating from her. Inside the apartment, we stood at the table, the letter between us like a living thing. Open it, she said softly. I can't. She reached out, covered my hand with hers. Then we'll do it together. We tore the seal. My eyes blurred as I scanned the words. Then they focused on one sentence that made my knees weak. Your petition has been approved. I gasped, covering my mouth. Ava caught me before I could collapse, laughing shakily. We did it, she whispered. Elena, we did it. The relief came in waves, but beneath it was something bigger, something I couldn't hold in anymore. Ava, I choked out. This started a survival, but I don't want you just as a lifeline. I want you because you're the only home I've ever found. Her eyes softened, and for once, there was no hesitation, no wall, no fear. Good, she said, pulling me close, because I was done pretending a long time ago. The kiss that followed was nothing like the first desperate one, or even the stolen ones after. This one was steady, sure, full of promise. It wasn't about proving anything to anyone. It was just ours. Later, we taped the approval notice to the fridge right under the magnet list. In shaky handwriting, I added one more word. Forever. Ava laughed, kissed the top of my head, and whispered, finally, something worth not running from. And just like that, what began as a desperate deal became exactly what neither of us had planned. But both of us needed. Love. If you enjoyed this content and want to support the channel in a special way, try clicking the thanks button below. It's the one with the heart and $sign icon. With super thanks, you can make a direct contribution to the channel, which helps me keep creating awesome videos for you.